Welcome back to the deep dive, where we take your source material and really dig into it, extracting every crucial nugget of knowledge.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are tackling something truly epic, an ambitious, incredibly detailed exploration of one of the most, well, powerful and frankly enigmatic civilizations in history, the Aztec Empire.
Yeah, it's a fascinating one. And our mission today is really to get beyond the usual headlines, the stuff that often just boils this huge culture down to warfare and sacrifice.
Right, there's so much more.
Exactly. We're going to unpack the extraordinary complexity of the people we often call Aztecs, but more accurately, the Mexica. We'll look at their pretty improbable rise from the marshes of Lake Texcoco, the sheer sophistication of their capital city, their engineering.
Incredible engineering.
Oh, absolutely. And then their deep, really essential religious beliefs, their cosmology, and of course the tragic but also enduring way their empire eventually collapsed.
And we've got a really solid stack of sources for you, articles, historical accounts, some groundbreaking modern archaeology too, to guide us through this pretty complex story.
And maybe let's start right there with a bit of essential context for you listening. You hear Aztec all the time, right? But we really need to unpack what that label actually means.
Okay.
Aztec is, well, it's basically a modern term. It got really popular in the 18th, 19th centuries thanks to European scholars, like Humboldt and Prescott.
So wait, that's not what they call themselves?
No, not primarily. The people who really built the empire, the dominant group, they were the Mexica. The term Aztec just means people from Aztlan, which was their legendary homeland.
Okay.
Once they settled down, built their capital, they mostly called themselves the Mexica, or sometimes the Tenochtitlan, after their city Tenochtitlan, or even more broadly, Nahuas, based on their language, Nahuatl.
Got it. So for this deep dive, we'll probably stick with Aztec just because it's the term everyone recognizes, the sort of umbrella for the empire created by that Triple Alliance.
Yeah, that makes sense for clarity.
But it's really crucial for you to remember, we're mostly talking about the Mexica of Tenochtitlan. They were the real driving force behind this huge power structure that basically flourished from around 1300 up to 1521.
And that brings us to the initial hook, right? The central paradox of this civilization. The Aztecs were the last great Mesoamerican empire. They had immense sophistication, architecture, intellectual achievements, science, advanced math, super efficient farming.
Really advanced stuff.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yet all of this incredible refinement was built on this constantly churning foundation of intense, ritualized warfare, aggressive demands for tribute, and yes, human sacrifice. But, and this is key, they didn't see it as barbarism. It was a necessary defining spiritual commitment.
Okay, let's dive into that rise then. How did they get started? #Azalite. The rise of the Mexica and the floating capital.
Right. So to really get a handle on the scale of this empire, which eventually controlled states from the Atlantic to the Pacific, we have to start with their origin story.
They weren't originally from the main valley, were they?
No, exactly. The Mexica were actually latecomers to the Valley of Mexico. They were migrant tribes moving south sometime in the 13th century. Their journey supposedly begins in this legendary homeland called Aztlan.
Aztlan. What do we know about it?
Aztlan means white land. And in their histories, it's always described as this place of idyllic, almost austere perfection. The story goes that their ancestors, called the Azteca back then, left Aztlan because their powerful patron god, Huitzilopochtli,
God of War and the Sun.
that's the one. He instructed them to leave. And it was during this big migration south that he told them to change their name, to stop being the Azteca and become the Mexica.
So a name change is part of their destiny.
Precisely. It fundamentally shifted their identity. They weren't just migrants anymore. They were a people with a divinely ordained mission.
And this origin story, Aztlan, it wasn't just some dusty old tale for them, was it? It stayed important.
Oh, hugely important. Almost like a religious touchstone, even centuries later when the empire was massive. There's this fantastic story about Moctezuma I who ruled in the mid-1400s, who actually sent a kind of questing party to try and find Aztlan.
Seriously. Find the physical place.
Well, it seems it was less about pinpointing it on a map and more about spiritual validation.
Yeah.
Moctezuma gathered 60 of his most esteemed sorcerers and magicians for this mission.
60 sorcerers.
Yeah. And he gave them all these lavish gifts, gold, precious stones, even cacao, which was super valuable to take to the ancestors still living in Aztlan. The accounts say the sorcerers actually transformed themselves into animals like birds and jaguars to make the final difficult journey into this mythical realm.
Wow. Okay, so what did they find?
Well, when they finally got there, the contrast with the opulence and wealth of Tenochtitlan was apparently really stark. They met Kotlikue, who was Huitzilopochtli's mother. And she revealed something pretty damning about their successful empire back home.
Uh-oh. What was it?
She told them that the people still in Aztlan, they remained immortal precisely because they didn't consume all the luxuries like the cacao and gold that had become so central to life for the nobility in Tenochtitlan.
Ouch.
Yeah. The ancient priest of Aztlan actually refused the gifts Moctezuma had sent, saying, and this is close to a quote, that those things had ruined you.
That's a really powerful internal critique, isn't it? A super successful, wealthy empire whose own founding myth basically says their wealth is morally corrosive.
It's a critical insight, I think. It shows this tension they felt between the maybe pure, austere past and the potentially corrupting nature of their present success. It's like a built-in cautionary tale right in their history.
So, okay, they migrate south. Eventually, they reach the Valley of Mexico, but it wasn't smooth sailing, right? They ended up on these swampy islands in Lake Texcoco.
Yeah, they struggled initially. They were kind of forced onto those unpromising islands after a, let's say, rather violent incident involving the daughter of the king of Culhuacan. It involved flaying her after a sacrifice. Not great diplomacy.
Yikes. But that difficult location actually led to their greatest achievement.
In a way, yes, it forced them to become brilliant engineers just out of necessity. And it led to the founding of Tenochtitlan around 1325 CE. They were following that prophecy from Huitzilopochtli, settle, where you see a giant eagle eating a snake perched on a prickly pear cactus.
The image on a Mexican flag today.
Exactly. That marked the spot. But building a city there on low-lying islands in a big, mostly salty lake, that was the challenge that made them innovate.
So they start small, but then things change.
Right. Initially, they were just a minor power, actually paying tribute to the big guys, the Tepanec state of Azcapotzalco. But the game changer came in 1428. That's when they formed the Triple Alliance.
Okay, who was in the alliance?
It was a really sophisticated pact, military, economic, political, between the Mexica of Tenochtitlan, the Acolo people of Texcoco, and the Tepaneca of Tlacopan.
And the goal was?
The immediate goal was to defeat their overlords, Azcapotzalco, and they did. Once that major rival was gone, the alliance became the engine driving the expansion of the empire across Mesoamerica.
Was it an equal partnership?
It started out more balanced, but pretty quickly. Tenochtitlan, the Mexica city, established itself as the dominant force, militarily, politically. Texcoco and Tlacopan became, well, more like junior partners, handling tribute collection in certain areas. But the real center of gravity, undisputedly Tenochtitlan.
Okay, let's talk about Tenochtitlan itself. This city built on islands. The scale sounds just incredible, especially since modern Mexico City is right on top of it.
It's hard to wrap your head around, honestly. By the early 1500s, Tenochtitlan was immense. Just the city proper, maybe 212,500 people at least.
Wow.
But if you include all the surrounding towns and settlements that were basically part of the greater urban area, the population could have been anywhere from 300,000 up to maybe even 700,000 people.
That's huge for that time.
Oh, absolutely. One of the largest cities anywhere in the world then, easily rivaling places like Paris or Constantinople.
So how did they possibly support that many people? Essentially building, like you said, Manhattan on a swamp. The engineering must have been off the charts.
It really was mind-boggling. They faced multiple huge challenges. First, they built these massive causeways connecting the island city to the mainland. Think of the main one to Tacuba. These were vital for trade, moving troops, but they also acted as huge dikes controlling water levels.
And the lake water itself was a problem, wasn't it? Salty.
Most of it, yeah. The lake naturally had freshwater parts fed by rivers, but also large, brackish, salty areas. They had to manage this.
How do you keep the salt water out?
They built an absolutely enormous dike. It was called the Alberidon of Nezahualcoyotl, named after the ruler of Texcoco who helped design and build it. This thing was like 10 miles long. It physically separated the salty water to the east from the fresh water on the west side, near the city. It basically created this giant artificial freshwater reservoir right next to them.
Incredible. Okay, so they have fresh water nearby, but how did they get it into the densely packed city?
Monumental infrastructure. They built two massive aqueducts side by side, made of terracotta sections. Each one stretched over 2.5 miles, bringing clean water directly from springs on the mainland at Chapultepec, right into the heart of Tenochtitlan.
Why two?
Pure genius. The dual system meant they could shut one down for cleaning or repairs while the other kept flowing. So the city always had an uninterrupted supply of fresh water, essential for that many people.
Okay, water sorted. What about food? Feeding hundreds of thousands.
That's where they developed probably the most efficient, intensive farming method anywhere in the world at the time, the chinampas.
The floating gardens, though they didn't actually
Fielder?
float, right?
Right, not really floating. They were raised fields, basically artificial islands built up in the shallow parts of the lake bed. They'd layer mud dredged from the canals, rich organic stuff, vegetation, and hold it all together with woven reeds, stakes, and trees planted along the edges. The canals in between were key.
For irrigation.
Irrigation, yes, but also drainage and constant fertilization. They dredge the nutrient-rich muck from the bottom of the canals and pile it onto the chinampas. Because of this constant feeding and the water supply, they could get up to 7 crops per year from the same plot.
7 crops, compared to like 1 or 2 usually.
Exactly. Compared to typical rain-fed farming, they grew maize, beans, squash, tomatoes, chilies, flowers, year-round production. It made Tenochtitlan largely self-sufficient in basic foods, which is just astounding for a city that size.
Okay, the city itself. You mentioned causeways, canals for transport.
Yeah.
How was it laid out?
Very deliberately. It was laid out symmetrically, divided into 4 big sections called campan, and crisscrossing through everything were those canals, used like streets for canoes. But the absolute heart, the center of the empire, was the ritual precinct.
The ceremonial center.
Yeah, a massive square walled off, containing something like 45 public buildings. This wasn't just religious, it was the spiritual, political, and educational core of the whole Aztec world. It had the elite schools for nobles, the Calmacac, ball courts for their ritual game, and dominating everything, the Templo Mayor.
And what's something a visitor would have seen there that would just scream power? Like raw Mexica power.
Without a doubt, the Zampantli, the skull rack.
Right, the skull rack.
Archaeology, especially recent finds, confirms this wasn't just a small display. It was a monumental structure, a huge timber frame absolutely covered in the skulls of sacrificed victims, thousands of them. It was a terrifyingly visible statement about their military might and their dedication to the cycle of sacrifice.
Chilling. And what about the rulers? We get a glimpse of their lifestyle from Moctezuma II's palace, right?
Yeah, his palace, or really palace complex. Sources say it had maybe 100 rooms, each with its own bath. But what really shows the sophistication and, frankly, the power was his interest in, like, natural sciences and logistics.
You mean the zoos and stuff?
Exactly. He maintained this huge complex focused on the natural world, 2 separate zoos, one just for birds of prey like eagles and hawks, a massive botanical garden, probably used for research, medicinal plants, food plants, and get this, a really sophisticated aquarium.
An aquarium in the middle of Mexico.
Yep, with 20 different ponds. They'd figured out how to maintain both freshwater and saltwater environments. They had fish, crustaceans, sea turtles, aquatic birds, all brought hundreds of miles from the Atlantic and Pacific coasts.
Okay, keeping 20 salt and freshwater ponds going, miles from the sea, without modern tech. That's not just a rich guy's hobby. That's an insane display of wealth, scientific curiosity, and state-level organization and power.
Absolutely. It speaks volumes about their capabilities.
Okay, so we've got this incredible city, this feat of engineering. Let's shift now from the physical structure to the worldview, the beliefs that really drove everything. Aztec religion.
Right. And as we touched on, the foundation, the core duality for the Mexica was war and agriculture, conflict and sustenance. And this wasn't just an idea, it was built right into their main temple, the Templo Mayor.
That massive pyramid with the 2 shrines on top, not just one. What did those twin shrines represent?
They literally embodied the sacred geography of the Mexica universe. The shrine on the left, painted blue and white, that was for Tlaloc.
The rain god. Fertility, water.
Exactly. Tlaloc's side symbolized Tenochtitlan, the hill of sustenance. It represented all the agricultural wealth, the life-giving water they depended on.
And the other shrine.
The one on the right, painted with bold red and white stripes, that was for Huitzilopochtli, their tribal patron god, the god of sun and war. His side symbolized Coatepec, the serpent mountain.
What's the significance of Serpent Mountain?
That's the mythical place where Huitzilopochtli was born, and where he famously defeated his sister, the moon goddess Koyosaki, and his 400 star siblings. That primordial battle basically established the cosmic cycle of sun versus darkness, day versus night. So every time they expanded the Templum Mare, which they did many times, they were ritually recreating these two fundamental myths, sustenance and cosmic war.
Their pantheon of gods was huge, though, right? They kept adding gods from people they conquered.
Oh yeah, it was vast. Absorbing local deities was a smart way to integrate conquered peoples and legitimize Mexica rule. But underlying it all was this ultimate creator deity, Ometeotl,
Meteotl.
the two god.
Yeah, the two god. A primordial androgynous creator way up in the highest heaven who didn't really get direct worship much, but from Ometeotl came all the other major players. Tezcatlipoca, the unpredictable god of fate and sorcery, often depicted with a smoking mirror.
Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, god of wisdom, culture hero. Right. And tons of others like Huehuecoyotl, the trickster god of music, dance, sex. This huge pantheon meant basically every aspect of life, cosmic and daily, had a divine force associated with it, needing specific attention, specific offerings.
Which brings us to sacrifice. This is often the hardest part for us to understand today. You said it wasn't just violence for them.
Not in their view. It was absolutely essential. Think of it like a cosmic maintenance contract. Their whole cosmology was based on this deep anxiety. They believed the world had already been destroyed 4 times before. They were living in the 5th age, the era of the sun of movement, and it was constantly under threat of collapse.
So sacrifice was needed to keep it going.
Yes, to keep the sun rising each day, to keep the universe turning, to prevent cosmic destruction. They believed the gods themselves had sacrificed themselves to create this current world, so humans had to repay that debt. They needed to feed the gods the most precious substance, chalchihuatl, precious water, which meant human blood and hearts. It was the ultimate form of reciprocity, of exchange.
And for the victims, it wasn't always seen as just punishment.
In many contexts, no. Victims, often warriors captured in battle, were sometimes seen as almost divine messengers, collaborators in keeping the universe alive. It could be seen as an honorable death. Elite Mexico warriors even fought specific campaigns called flowery wars.
Flowery wars. What were those?
These were like formalized ritual battles fought specifically against enemy city-states like their longtime rivals, the Tlaxcalans. The main goal wasn't necessarily to conquer territory, but explicitly to capture high-status warriors alive, specifically for sacrifice. It was a way to guarantee a steady supply of the necessary offerings for the gods.
The sheer number of sacrifices is often debated, but even the lower estimates sound huge.
They are staggering. Okay, the Aztecs' own accounts, like claiming 80,400 people were sacrificed for the big rededication of the Templo Mayor in 1487. That's almost certainly propaganda, meant to terrify their enemies. But even more conservative scholarly estimates suggest thousands per year across the empire, maybe somewhere between 1,000 and 20,000 annually. And these weren't chaotic. They were highly organized, bureaucratic affairs, scheduled precisely according to their complex calendars.
Let's talk about the methods. You mentioned heart extraction and something called the Tenochtitlan.
Methods varied depending on the god. Heart removal with a super sharp obsidian knife, usually performed on top of a pyramid, was the most common for Huitzilopochtli. Decapitation was linked to fertility gods. Drowning victims were offered to Tlaloc. The Tenochtitlan was different. It was a specific type of gladiatorial sacrifice.
Gladiatorial, like in Rome.
Sort of, but highly ritualized. The Tenochtitlan is the name for the event, but also for the stone itself. These were huge, intricately carved stone discs found in digs. The captive warrior, often a famous enemy champion, would be tied to the center of this stone by a short rope.
And then forced to fight.
Exactly. Often given inferior weapons, like maybe a wooden sword edged with feathers instead of obsidian blades, and then they'd have to face several fully armed elite Aztec jaguar or eagle warriors. The outcome was pretty much certain, but the fight, the spectacle, the warrior's brave death, that was the point. Symbolizing the cycle of death, feeding life through spilled blood.
Okay, speaking of symbolism, the ritual for Totec, the flayed lord. This one sounds particularly gruesome.
It is visually shocking to us, absolutely. Totec was the god of spring, seeds, agricultural renewal. His main festival, Tlacaxipehuisli, which literally means the flaying of men, involved exactly that. Priests would ritually flay a sacrificed war captive.
And then
the priest would wear the victim's skin, the second skin they called it. They'd wear it for about 20 days during the festival period.
Why? What was the symbolism there?
It sounds horrific, but for them, it was a profound metaphor. The shedding of the human skin was seen as mirroring how a seed sheds its outer husk in the spring to allow the new green shoot to emerge. It represented regeneration, the earth renewing itself, providing food, rebirth coming directly from decay and death.
We get a much clearer picture of just how central all this was from archaeology, right?
Yeah.
Especially the offerings found at the Templo Mayor.
Oh, the offering caches are just mind-blowing. Excavations have found dozens of these sealed ritual deposits dating from about 1440 to 1520. Inside, they found the remains of over 400 different species of animals.
400 species, not just local animals then?
No way. Sure, there were pumas, jaguars, eagles, rattlesnakes, Mexican wolves. But the really incredible part showing the sheer reach of the empire's tribute and trade networks was the amount of marine life.
Marine life. But Tenochtitlan was hundreds of miles inland.
Exactly. They found hundreds of species of fish, corals, shells, crabs, mollusks, sea turtles, even crocodiles. An analysis shows many came from the Atlantic coast, the Gulf of Mexico, which was a huge journey away. Others came from the Pacific. They were bringing the entire cosmos from both oceans right to the heart of their city and burying it as offerings beneath the shrines of Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc.
That's commitment on an imperial scale. What else did they find?
Another amazing find was about 2,550 wooden artifacts. Normally, wood decays completely in the tropics, right?
Yeah, almost never survives.
But these were perfectly preserved. Things like ceremonial scepters, masks, earplugs, even miniature darts and spear throwers, edibles. They survived because the Mexica deliberately placed them inside sealed stone boxes that filled with water, creating anaerobic conditions.
So waterlogged preservation.
Exactly. And advanced analysis, like microscopy, could even show traces of the original vibrant paint on these wooden objects.
Right.
They were specific dedications linked directly to Tlaloc and Huitzilopochtli.
All of this ritual, the warfare, the farming, it all had to be timed perfectly, right? Which brings us to their calendars.
Precision was everything. The Aztecs used a really complex triple calendar system. First, you had the 260-day ritual calendar, the Tonopawali. This was purely for divination, scheduling ceremonies, figuring out auspicious days.
Okay.
Then there was the 365-day solar calendar, the Ju-Pawali. This tracked the agricultural year, broken into 18 months of 20 days each, plus 5 unlucky or transitional days at the end.
And the third part.
The crucial part was how these two cycles meshed. They lined up perfectly only once every 52 years. This 52-year period was called the Yumulpili, or the calendar round.
And the end of that 52-year cycle, that was a really big deal, wasn't it? Like scary big.
Hugely scary. It was a time of profound cosmic anxiety. They genuinely believed that at the end of a 52-year cycle, if the gods weren't satisfied with the sacrifices and rituals performed, the world could literally end. The sun might not rise.
What do they think would happen?
They feared that Tsimime, these terrifying female star demons, would descend from the dark sky and devour humanity. So at the end of every 52-year cycle, the entire city, the entire empire would hold its breath. All fires were extinguished. Everyone waited in darkness.
For what?
For the climax, the new fire ceremony. Priests would process to a specific hill, watch the stars, and at the precise moment, attempt to drill a new fire on the chest of a sacrifice victim. If the fire caught, it was a sign the gods had granted another 52 years of existence. Runners would take torches lit from this new fire back to rekindle flames in temples and homes across the land. It was arguably the single most important ritual in their entire civilization.
Wow. So the very existence of the world felt like it was hanging in the balance every 52 years and constantly needed maintenance through sacrifice. That level of existential pressure must have shaped everything about their society. The need for order, for productivity.
It absolutely permeated everything. The constant need for tribute to fuel the state and rituals, the constant warfare to get captives for sacrifice, the intense agricultural productivity needed to feed that massive city. It all stemmed from this fundamental obligation to maintain cosmic balance. The divine demands basically wrote the social contract. #3, Aztec society and daily nourishment.
Okay, let's dig into that social contract then. The actual structure, the mechanics of this empire that controlled something like 11 million people, it sounds like a very hierarchical society.
Oh, definitely rigid. At the very top, you had the rulers of individual city-states, the Tlatoani, the speaker with the emperor, the Huitzilopochtli, great speaker of Tenochtitlan, above them all. Below them was the hereditary nobility, the Pippletons.
And below the nobles.
Then came the vast majority, the commoners, the Meshualtin. They were farmers, artisans, soldiers. Below them, you might have tenant farmers or serfs tied to noble lands. And at the bottom were slaves, the Plakotin, often people who had fallen into debt or been captured in war, though slavery wasn't usually hereditary.
But unlike some really rigid systems, you could move up, right?
Oh.
Especially through war.
Yes, warfare was the key ladder for social mobility. While the Pippleton, the nobles, had all sorts of inherent privileges, they didn't pay taxes. They got educated in special elite schools called Kalmikak, a commoner, a Msiowal, could achieve huge prestige and effectively join the lower ranks of nobility through military success.
How? By capturing enemies.
Exactly. Capturing enemies alive for sacrifice was the measure of a warrior. If a commoner captured, say, 4 or more enemy warriors, they could earn the right to join the elite military orders, like the famous Jaguar or Eagle warriors. This granted them privileges, wearing certain insignia, carrying special weapons, even consuming luxury goods usually reserved for nobles.
But it sounds like the ruling class tried to push back against that a bit, especially under Moctezuma II.
Yes, that's interesting. Moctezuma II, the emperor who met Cortez, seems to have enacted stricter sumptuary laws. These were rules specifically designed to limit who could wear or use certain luxury goods, things like fine cotton cloaks, specific types of sandals, jade jewelry.
To keep commoners, even successful warriors, in their place.
Pretty much. It looks like a conscious political move to reinforce the status and privileges of the hereditary nobility, perhaps because the status gained through warfare by commoners was becoming, maybe a bit too widespread for the old guard's liking.
Okay, so what fueled this whole system? The economy. It was based on farming, markets, and that tribute system you mentioned.
Tribute was absolutely fundamental. Remember, the Aztec Empire wasn't like a solid block of territory like the Roman Empire. It was more of a hegemonic system. They controlled dozens, maybe hundreds of client city-states, called altepetl.
And controlled them mainly by demanding tribute.
Primarily, yes. They'd conquer a place, install a friendly ruler, or keep the old one if they cooperated, and then impose heavy taxes, paid in goods. This tribute had to be delivered regularly, often specified as every 80 days. We have surviving tribute lists, codices, that meticulously itemize exactly what each province owed: so many tons of maize, so many bundles of cotton cloaks, specific amounts of gold dust, bags of cochineal dye, loads of feathers, even warrior costumes or sacrificial victims.
Managing all that, getting it to Tenochtitlan, must have required some serious logistics.
Absolutely massive administration. And the physical movement of goods relied heavily on human porters, as they didn't have wheeled vehicles or large draft animals. But a key group involved in long-distance movement were the Pateca.
The merchants, the traders?
Yes, but they were much more than just merchants. The Pateca were a distinct social group, almost like a hereditary guild. They specialized in long-distance trade, moving high-value, low-bulk luxury goods over incredible distances. Think brilliant tropical bird feathers like quetzal plumes from Guatemala, jaguar pelts, jade, cacao beans.
And you mentioned they had another role, too. Something more clandestine.
Yes. This is where the Pateca get really fascinating. They weren't just traders. They often functioned as spies for the emperor and the state.
Spies? How did that work?
Well, their trading expeditions often took them into territories that weren't yet conquered or were maybe recently subdued. While they were there trading, they were gathering crucial intelligence mapping routes, assessing military strength, identifying local political factions or instability, gauging the wealth and resources of a region.
So their caravans were like mobile intelligence units.
Pretty much. And their status was kind of ambiguous and protected. If a Pacheca caravan was attacked or its merchants harmed in a foreign territory, that could often serve as the official pretext, the casus belli, for a full-scale Aztec military invasion. This dual role made them incredibly important, privileged, and kind of feared, even though they often tried to maintain a lower profile.
Wow. Okay, besides tribute and long-distance trade, what about local markets?
The market system was huge and vibrant. The main market was actually in Tenochtitlan's sister city, Tlatelolco, connected by causeway. The Spanish conquistadors who saw it were absolutely stunned by its size and organization.
What do they say?
They described tens of thousands of people buying, selling, bartering, everything imaginable: food, pottery, textiles, tools, slaves, luxury goods, all laid out in specific sections, highly organized. There were market overseers, judges who resolved disputes instantly right there in the marketplace. It was incredibly orderly.
And they did all this without coins, right?
Right. No minted currency. They used various things as forms of exchange. Cacao beans were common for small purchases. Standardized lengths of cotton cloth, called cuatli, served as a higher value unit. Copper axe monies, little T-shaped pieces, were also used. It was a sophisticated barter and exchange system.
Okay, let's talk food. The stuff that literally fueled this empire. You mentioned their agriculture had a global impact because of the Three Sisters, maize, beans, and squash.
Yes, those were the absolute staples. And the science behind how they prepared maize, or corn, was ingenious. Maize was sacred, the number one food. But the crucial step was nixtamalization.
Nixtamalization. That's soaking the corn in lime water, right?
Exactly, usually water with dissolved limestone or wood ash. Soaking the dried kernels in this alkaline solution did a couple of vital things. It softened the tough outer hull, making it easier to grind into dough, the masa for tortillas and tamales, but much more importantly, chemically.
What did it do, chemical?
It unlocked the niacin, vitamin B3, trapped in the corn. Without nixtamalization, humans can't really absorb that niacin, and a diet heavy in untreated corn leads to pellagra, a nasty deficiency disease. But the Aztecs figured this process out empirically, and by combining nixtamalized maize with beans.
They got a complete protein.
Precisely. The amino acid profiles of corn and beans complement each other perfectly. Together, they provide a complete protein source. This combination allowed them to sustain a huge, relatively healthy population on a largely plant-based diet without needing vast amounts of animal protein. It was brilliant nutritional science, arrived at through centuries of tradition.
So they basically hacked their food for maximum nutrition. What else did they eat?
Oh, their diet was rich beyond the staples. Tomatoes, avocados, numerous varieties of chili peppers, essential for flavor and vitamins, amaranth grain, chia seeds. For the nobility, it got much fancier. They had access to imported tropical fruits like papayas, vanilla for flavoring, and, of course, cacao.
Chocolate, but not sweet chocolate like ours.
No, definitely not. They made a drink called socolatl, or cacahuatl, from ground cacao beans. It was generally bitter, frothy, often spiced with chili or other things, maybe sweetened slightly with honey. It was a high-status stimulant beverage, mostly reserved for nobles, warriors, and for ritual use.
And meat? Was that common?
Not really for the average person. Domesticated animals were very limited compared to the Old World. They had dogs, which were sometimes bred for food, turkeys, the hucalotl, and muscovy ducks. That was about it.
So commoners mostly ate plants.
Largely, yes. Maize tortillas, tamales, beans, squash, chilies formed the core diet. They'd supplement with insects, larvae, algae from the lake. Hunting provided some meat deer, rabbits, armadillos, birds, but it wasn't a daily thing for most. Those coastal delicacies the emperor enjoyed, like oysters and sea fish. Purely elite food.
Okay, lastly in this section, let's touch on gender roles within this structured society. You mentioned a concept of complementarity.
Right. Aztec ideology stressed gender complementarity, a kind of balance. Society was definitely divided along gender lines, but the idea was that neither sphere was inherently superior to the other. Both were necessary for the world to function.
So men did certain things, women did others.
Generally, yes. Men's work was associated more with the public sphere, warfare, politics, heavy agriculture, certain crafts. Women's domain was primarily the domestic sphere, raising children, managing the household, preparing food, especially the crucial time-consuming grinding of maize on a metate, and weaving textiles, which was incredibly important economically and ritually.
But was women's work valued?
Metaphorically, yes, very much so. The sources emphasize this. A woman's domestic labor, especially the difficult task of grinding maize or the intricate skill of weaving, was often explicitly equated in value to a man capturing a prisoner in battle. Both were seen as essential acts that sustained the cosmos and the state.
Did that metaphorical value translate into any actual rights or freedoms for women?
Actually, yes. To a degree that might surprise some people, Aztec inheritance was generally bilateral, meaning property and status could pass down through both the mother's and the father's lines. This meant women could inherit, own, and manage property independently.
So they had economic agency.
They did. They could enter into contracts, engage in marketplace activities as merchants on a small scale, even initiate divorce proceedings under certain circumstances. While their lives were certainly constrained by societal expectations, they weren't simply powerless dependents. Some women also held respected professional roles as midwives, healers, or priestesses associated with certain goddesses. #tag 5oi, art, writing, and the preservation of knowledge.
All right, let's move from the social fabric to how they express themselves and record their knowledge. Art, writing. It sounds like they really valued the past.
Immensely. The Mexica had this deep reverence for Mesoamerican history, especially for the cultural achievements of the civilizations that came before them, particularly the Toltecs.
The Toltecs were seen as like the master craftsmen.
Right. Exactly. They admired the Toltecs so much that the Nahuatl word for artisan or craftsman was literally Toltcatl. It implied skill, artistry, a connection to that esteemed past. They didn't just admire the past either, they actively collected and incorporated it.
How's
Archaeologists find amazing things buried in the offerings at the Templo Mayor, like ancient Olmec masks, things made maybe 1,000 years before the Aztecs even arrived in the valley. They treasured these objects. And their own art was incredibly diverse. It ranged from tiny, intricately engraved precious stones or shells, all the way up to truly monumental stone sculptures.
and the style? Was it realistic, abstract?
It was often a fascinating mix. You see incredibly naturalistic details like the way they rendered the scales on a serpent or the feathers on an eagle warrior costume. But these realistic elements are combined with highly stylized, symbolic, and often quite abstract forms to convey complex religious or cosmological ideas. Think about the famous Kotlik statue.
The earth goddess statue. It's pretty terrifying.
It is intense. Skirt of snakes, necklace of human hearts and hands. But the details, the snakeskin patterns, are rendered with great naturalism, even amidst the symbolic abstraction.
Their most famous works are probably those massive stone sculptures like the sunstone, often called the calendar stone, but that's not quite right, is it?
Not really a functional calendar, no. The Sunstone, or Piedra del Sol, is just spectacular. Unearthed in Mexico City back in 1790, it weighs about 24 tons, nearly 12 feet across. It's really a cosmic monument.
What does it depict?
It's a visual chronicle of the Aztec creation story, their cosmology. It shows the 5 successive creations, or suns, of the world according to their beliefs. In the very center is the face of the current sun god, Tenochtitlan, or possibly the earth monster Tlaltecutli. Around that are symbols representing the previous 4 failed creations. And the outer ring depicts serpents carrying the sun across the sky. Its main function was religious and symbolic, tying the Mexica present to the vast timeline of cosmic history.
And they had specific types of sculptures linked directly to the rituals we talked about, like the Quaxicali.
Yes, exactly. The Coaxicali, meaning eagle vessel, were large stone bowls, often elaborately carved, sometimes in the shape of jaguars or eagles. These were specifically designed as receptacles to hold the human hearts extracted during sacrifices.
And the Tamaulicatl stones.
Right. Those large, flat, carved discs we mentioned earlier, where the gladiatorial sacrifices took place. These monumental ritual sculptures weren't hidden away. They were placed prominently in the sacred precinct, constant, visible reminders of the pact between humans and the gods written in stone. Originally, many of these stone monuments would have been brightly painted, maybe even inlaid with precious materials, making them even more visually stunning.
Okay, stone is one thing. But what about more perishable arts? Featherwork sounds like it was a really big deal.
Oh, featherwork Amantecaotl was considered one of the highest art forms. The artisans who did this, the Amanteca, came from specific neighborhoods, inherited their skills, and enjoyed high status, even being exempt from taxes sometimes.
What kind of feathers did they use?
They created these incredible, intricate mosaics using thousands upon thousands of tiny, brilliantly colored feathers from tropical birds. The most prized were the long, iridescent green tail feathers of the quetzal bird, which had to be obtained through tribute or trade all the way from the cloud forests of Chiapas and Guatemala, hundreds of miles away.
What do they make with them?
Spectacular things. Shields covered in feather designs, elaborate headdresses for rulers like the famous one attributed to Moctezuma, banners, intricate costumes for warriors and priests. The sheer shimmering beauty and the rarity of the materials made these objects incredibly valuable, reserved mostly for the emperor, top nobles, and higher-ranking warriors.
Okay, so they had amazing visual arts. How did they record information? Their writing system sounds complicated.
It is complex, and it doesn't fit neatly into our modern categories. It was basically a mixed system. It used logograms, pictograms, and crucially phonetic signs based on the rebus principle.
Okay, break that down. Logograms.
Logograms are signs where a picture represents a whole word. So a simple drawing of a mountain stands for the word Tepetl, meaning mountain, or often by extension a city-state located on or near a mountain. That's pretty straightforward.
Pictograms.
Pictograms tell a story or convey information through a sequence of images. Think of footprints indicating a journey or a path, or a temple shown burning to represent conquest.
And the phonetic part, the rebus principle. That's using pictures for sounds, right?
Exactly. This is where it gets clever. An image isn't used for its meaning, but for its sound, which then helps spell out another word, often a name or place name that's hard to draw directly. For example, the Nahuatl word for tooth is tlantli. A scribe could draw a tooth, not to mean tooth, but just to represent the phonetic syllable tula.
Can you give an example of how they'd combine these to write something complex, like that place name Mapachtepec?
Sure, Mapactepec means Hill of the Raccoon. There isn't really a simple standard glyph for raccoon. So the scribe starts with the logogram for hill or mountain to pedal. Then to spell the Mapach part, meaning raccoon, they use phonetic clues. They might draw a hand because the word for hand is matal, giving the syllable ma. Then they might draw some moss or fibers because the word for that is patli, giving the syllable patch.
So Hand Moss Mountain becomes Mapachtepetl, Hill of the Raccoon.
You got it. A trained scribe reading those signs together, hand, ma, plus moss, patch, placed near or on the mountain to pedal, glyph would know to pronounce it Mapashtepec. It requires knowing the language and the conventions, but it was a functional system.
And where did they write all this down? In books.
Yes, in manuscripts we now call codices. These were often long strips of bark paper, amate, or treated deerskin, folded accordion style. They were painted by highly skilled scribes, the tlaquilos.
And these codices are super important sources for us now.
Absolutely crucial. The few surviving pre-colonial codices, like the Codex Borbonicus, are mostly ritual and divinatory calendars, almanacs tracking good and bad days, depictions of gods and ceremonies. They are almost entirely pictorial, with maybe just some date glyphs.
How did things change after the Spanish arrived?
The production of codices continued for a while into the colonial period, but the style and purpose shifted. Colonial-era codices are fascinating because they often blend the old traditions with new European influences.
Like the Florentine Codex.
Exactly. The Florentine Codex is a massive 12-volume encyclopedia of Aztec life, religion, history, and nature, compiled by the Franciscan friar Bernardino de Sahagún in the mid-16th century. What makes it invaluable is that Sahagún worked directly with surviving Aztec elders, nobles, and scribes, tlamatanime, to record their knowledge.
So it's their perspective, but written down later.
Yes, it features parallel columns of text Nahuatl written using the Latin alphabet alongside a Spanish translation or summary. It also includes thousands of illustrations done by indigenous artists, blending traditional styles with European techniques. It's an incredible, though complex and sometimes filtered window into their world, even though the Spanish authorities eventually got nervous about preserving pagan knowledge and censored or confiscated some of this work.
And new codices are still turning up.
It's amazing, but yes. Just recently, the codices of San Andres Tetepilco, written on traditional bark paper, were authenticated. They seem to date from the late 16th or early 17th century and contain maps, local histories, records of rulers, confirming that indigenous communities kept using these traditional formats to record their own histories and identities well into the colonial era, sometimes in secret.
Beyond the visual arts and writing, what about spoken word, poetry, song?
Oh, the spoken and sung word was held in incredibly high esteem. Cuicatl means song, and Tlahtoli refers to speech, stories, or formal discourse. These were central to religious ceremonies, festivals, court life, everything. Skill in oratory was highly valued.
Was there a particular style to their poetry?
Yes, a key feature was heavy use of parallelism, repeating ideas in slightly different ways for emphasis, and especially the use of diphrasis.
Diphrasis, what are those?
These are conventional paired metaphors where two concrete terms are used together consistently to represent a single abstract concept.
Like the famous one, Inzacatl, Incacatl.
Exactly, the flower, the song. Whenever you see that pair, it stands for poetry, art, symbolism, sometimes even truth itself. It's the quintessential Aztec metaphor for creative expression.
Are there other examples?
Lots of them. Jade and precious feathers in Chalchihuitl and Quetzali stood for richness, value, nobility. Water in burnt land, in Apple and Tlacanoli, was a metaphor for warfare or devastation. Seat and mat in Petlitl in Ixpali signified authority and rulership. This kind of metaphorical language permeated their elite speech and poetry, and both men and women could be recognized poets. There are records of noble women like Maquila who were famous for their compositions. #TagV, the complex collapse and lasting echoes.
Okay, we've built up this picture of a complex, powerful, sophisticated civilization at its absolute peak. And then 1519 happens. Hernan Cortez lands on the coast.
Yeah, the collision of worlds. In 1519, the Aztec Empire under Moctezuma II really did seem invincible, controlling millions. Cortés arrives with a relatively small force of Spaniards, maybe 500 soldiers, some cannons, horses. But crucially, he quickly starts making alliances with indigenous groups who hated Mexican domination, like the Totonacs and especially later, the Tlaxcalans.
So he lands, marches inland, and Moctezuma lets him into Tenochtitlan.
He does. In November 1519, Cortés and his men are welcomed into the capital. Moctezuma lodges them in a palace, treats them as guests, but very quickly, using a skirmish back on the coast as a pretext, Cortés pulls a classic conquistador move. He takes Moctezuma hostage within his own city.
Okay, for centuries, the story most of us heard was that the Aztecs, especially Moctezuma, were basically paralyzed because they thought Cortés was the god Quetzalcoatl returning, as promised in prophecy. Let's tackle that. Is it true?
This is probably the single most important myth about the conquest that needs correcting. The idea that the Mexica genuinely believed the Spaniards were returning gods. It's overwhelmingly rejected by serious modern historians.
Really? So where did that story come from?
It seems to have originated primarily after the conquest, largely promoted by Cortés himself in his letters back to Spain, and especially by his secretary, Francisco López de Gomara, who wrote a biography of Cortés years later, and Gomara had never even been to the Americas. It doesn't really show up strongly in the earliest, most direct indigenous accounts of the conquest.
So why did the white gods myth become so popular and stick around for so long?
Well, think about who it benefits. It served a powerful political and psychological purpose for the Europeans. Some historians bluntly call it political pornography. It paints the indigenous people as inherently naive, superstitious, fatalistic, easily duped, intellectually inferior.
Which then justifies the conquest, makes it seem inevitable, even divinely ordained.
Exactly. It downplays the violence, the disease, the political maneuvering, and the crucial role of indigenous allies, and instead emphasizes the supposed inherent European superiority. The reality was much more complex, and frankly, the Mexica were far more pragmatic.
So what was their reaction, according to more critical readings of the sources? Did they recognize the threat?
Oh, absolutely. They were canny political observers. Their own accounts, when you read them carefully, focus intensely on the things that were tangibly different and dangerous. The Spaniards' floating mountains, ships, their metal armor that arrows couldn't easily penetrate, the terrifying noise and power of their cannons and firearms, fire trumpets, and especially the horses, these huge, fast deer that carried armored men into battle. They immediately recognized a massive technological gap.
Not a divine one.
Not primarily a divine one. They were impressed, maybe even initially awed by the novelty, but also deeply concerned by the military potential. And later, Cortés's engineers even managed to build 13 small warships, brigantines, right there on the lake shores to blockade Tenochtitlan during the siege. That demonstrated an engineering and technological capacity the Aztecs simply couldn't match in that context.
Okay, so Cortés has Moctezuma hostage. Things are tense. What sparks the actual fighting in Tenochtitlan?
The situation explodes in June 1520. Cortés had actually left the city temporarily to deal with another Spanish force that had landed on the coast. He left his lieutenant, Pedro de Alvarado, in charge in Tenochtitlan.
Alvarado. What did he do?
During a major religious festival, the Feast of Toxcatl, thousands of Mexican nobles and warriors were gathered, unarmed, dancing in the main ceremonial patio. Alvarado, apparently fearing an attack, or maybe just wanting to seize the rich gold ornaments they were wearing, ordered his men to block the exits and massacre the dancers.
He attacked unarmed people during a festival.
Yes. Hundreds, maybe thousands were killed. It was a brutal, unprovoked slaughter, and that was the spark. The Mexica population erupted in fury and attacked the Spanish garrison ferociously.
And Moctezuma.
Yeah.
He dies around this time.
Yes. Shortly after the massacre, during the intense fighting, how he died is still debated. Spanish accounts claim his own people stoned him when he tried to calm the crowds from a rooftop, viewing him as a traitor. Some indigenous accounts suggest the Spanish killed him quietly themselves as things got desperate. Either way, he dies, and the Spanish situation becomes untenable.
This leads to the Noche Triste, the sad night.
Exactly. The Mexica warriors, now fiercely led by Motecuzuma's brother Cuitlahuac, drove the Spaniards and their Tlaxcalan allies out of Tenochtitlan in a chaotic, bloody nighttime retreat across the causeways. The Spanish suffered huge losses: men, horses, cannons, and most of the treasure they'd looted. It was a disaster for them.
But the Aztecs didn't manage to wipe them out completely, and something else was already happening, wasn't it? Something invisible.
Yes. The most decisive weapon of the conquest had already arrived, probably brought by one person in the rival Spanish expedition Cortés had gone to confront.
Smallpox.
Smallpox, the great killer. It hit the dense, immunologically naive population of central Mexico like a firestorm. It reached Tenochtitlan probably sometime in late 1520, after the Noche Triste, and the impact was catastrophic. Estimates are that in just that one initial wave, smallpox killed maybe 40% of the population of the Valley of Mexico, including Tenochtitlan.
40%. How did that affect the war effort?
Devastatingly. It didn't just kill commoners, it ripped through the leadership in the military. Soldiers were incapacitated or dying just when they were needed most. Crucially, the disease killed the new emperor, Cuitlahuac, the guy who had successfully driven the Spanish out. He died of smallpox after ruling for only about 80 days.
So a massive leadership vacuum right at the critical moment.
Exactly. It shattered the command structure. And beyond the direct deaths, the disease had crippling knock-on effects.
Like famine?
Widespread famine. So many people were sick or dying, they couldn't plant or harvest the crops, especially on those labor-intensive chinampas. The tribute system collapsed. Starvation set in among the survivors, weakening them further. One Franciscan friar later wrote about the horrifying scenes, people dying in heaps, like bedbugs.
And the psychological impact?
Must have been immense. Seeing this horrifying new disease sweep through, killing indiscriminately, while the Spaniards seemed largely immune, it undoubtedly fostered a sense of despair, maybe even a feeling that their own gods had abandoned them. And this wasn't a one-off event. Smallpox was just the first wave. Huge epidemics of measles and other old world diseases followed in 1545, 1576, decimating the population again and again, preventing any real demographic recovery for centuries.
So Cortés retreats, regroups, and then comes back.
Yes. He retreats to friendly Tlaxcala, recovers, gets reinforcements, and crucially, spends months building those 13 brigantines, those warships armed with cannons, specifically designed to control Lake Texcoco and support a siege. The new, young emperor in Tenochtitlan was Cuauhtémoc, Motecuzoma's nephew, a brave leader determined to resist.
But Cortés now has ships on the lake and thousands of allies.
Tens of thousands, especially the Tlaxcalans who absolutely hated the Mexica and were bent on revenge. Cortés launched his siege in May 1521. He used the brigantines to blockade the city, cutting off food supplies coming by canoe. He strategically destroyed the aqueducts, bringing fresh water into the city.
So trapped, starving, thirsty, and still weakened by disease.
Exactly. The siege lasted 93 incredibly brutal days. Fierce fighting block by block, causeway by causeway. But the combination of starvation, thirst, ongoing disease, relentless attacks by Spaniards, and the sheer numbers of vengeful indigenous allies proved overwhelming. Tenochtitlan finally fell on August 13, 1521. Cuauhtémoc was captured. The Aztec Empire, as an independent political entity, was finished.
Cortés immediately started building Mexico City on the ruins, didn't he?
He did, a deliberate act of replacement. He ordered the main temples razed, the ceremonial precinct dismantled, the canals filled in. The capital of New Spain would rise directly on top of the Mexica capital. But
the
story doesn't end there. Aztec culture, Nahu identity, it didn't just vanish overnight.
This is the enduring legacy part. How did it persist?
We see it in subtle ways, sometimes as a form of quiet resistance. Archaeology finds evidence of this. For instance, burials found on the outskirts of the new Spanish city, dating from the decades after the conquest, 1521, 1620, show indigenous people still burying their dead according to pre-Hispanic customs with traditional grave goods in specific positions, deliberately ignoring the Catholic burial practices the Spanish were trying to impose. It's like an understated resistance through maintaining tradition.
And we see echoes in colonial art, too.
Absolutely. Take colonial-era biombos, those large, painted, folding screens popular among the elite in Mexico City in the 17th century. Some of them depict scenes that fascinatingly blend Spanish and indigenous life. You might see a Catholic procession like Corpus Christi happening on one side, while on the other side, indigenous dancers are performing traditional ceremonial dances called mitotes.
Why is that significant?
Because preserving and performing these mitotes, which often recalled pre-Hispanic history and rulers, became a way for the surviving Mexican nobility and communities to maintain and pass down their collective memory, their political history, and assert a continued, vibrant identity right within the colonial system. It was a coded way of saying, we are still here.
And today, that Mexican history is fundamental to Mexican national identity, isn't it?
Completely fundamental. That core Mexica founding myth, the eagle devouring the snake on the cactus, the sign that told them where to build Tenochtitlan, that image is right there, center stage on the modern Mexican flag. It's the national coat of arms.
And the language?
Nahuatl didn't disappear either. It's still spoken by over 1 million people in Mexico today. And maybe even more significantly for the rest of the world, Nahuatl gave us a surprising number of loanwords that are now global, mostly through food.
Like what?
Well, chocolate, obviously, from xocolotl, avocado from aguacatl, tomato from tomato, chili from chili. Even words like coyote from coyotl and tamale from tamale. These Nahuatl words, carried by the foods and concepts they represented, have spread all over the world.
It's amazing. It's like the culinary and linguistic footprint of the empire far outlasted the empire itself.
It really is a powerful reminder that culture can be incredibly resilient, even after political collapse. Hashtag tag outro.
So if we just take a step back and look at the sheer scope of what the Mexican achieved, it really is stunning, isn't it? A civilization that mastered hydraulics to build a city on a lake, devised that incredibly complex triple calendar system, ran a massive empire based on tribute, created breathtaking art from feathers and stone, and fed hundreds of thousands using sophisticated agricultural science.
It's truly remarkable, and their fall, it's crucial to remember, wasn't because they were somehow destined to fail or believed the Spanish were gods. It was a catastrophic convergence of factors hitting them all at once.
Right, the technology gap.
A massive technological disadvantage. Steel weapons and armor, horses, cannons, those brigantines on the lake, that was huge. But arguably even more decisive was the unintentional biological warfare unleashed by smallpox and other diseases, which just decimated their population, shattered their leadership, and broke their capacity to resist.
They fought hard, though.
Incredibly hard. Cuauhtémoc's defense of Tenochtitlan was fierce, but ultimately they were overwhelmed by disease, starvation, and the fact that Cortés had managed to rally so many other indigenous groups against them. It really was a story of disastrous timing and overwhelming unforeseen forces.
And when you think about those Templo Mayor offerings again,
Yeah.
the animals, the shells, the coral brought from both the Atlantic and the Pacific, it just underscores the incredible reach and organizational power that world had achieved right before contact.
It absolutely does. And that leads us to maybe a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over. Given that proven capacity for statecraft, for military organization, for managing vast trade networks, what might have happened next for the Aztec Empire? What kind of influence could they have exerted, maybe even politically, across North or Central America if the timing of European arrival and those devastating diseases had been different, say, delayed by just 50 or 100 years? They were a civilization with tremendous momentum.
Something to think about. And always remember, their capital, Tenochtitlan, is still quite literally underfoot. Archaeologists are constantly making new discoveries, peeling back the layers of modern Mexico City to reveal more of that original, vibrant, incredibly complex pre-Columbian world. There's always more waiting to be found.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the complexity, the rise, the fall, and the really enduring legacy of the Aztec Empire.
Yeah, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.